Hello again. We're going to wrap up our little hauntology series with one last little bit. This is once again something from that period of time between 2016 and 2020. We just try not to think about too much, and how we coped with that on at least on something awful. And this story is very special. It's a very good bookend because we started with um, the apotheosis of Barack Obama, and now we're going to get into something of a sequel to that. So, without further ado, I know I've wasted enough of your time. You've wasted enough of your time already listening to the rest of this stuff, so here we go. One spring, during President Trump's third consecutive term, the flowers didn't bloom. Nobody knew why, specifically. It could be blamed in some broad sense on climate change and our total failure to deal with it, but no chemical or biological reason could be pinpointed. Weeks into June and not a single blossom could be found anywhere. These things come in cycles, my father says. When I was a kid, we had winters with 10-foot snowdrifts. You all complain too much. They'll be back next year. None of us were quite sure what to make of it. Accusations of alarmism flew from all corners. Younger generations claimed it was a sign of the end times. Older generations were less concerned. It'll get better, they told us. The summer passed without a trace. Hot, bright, colorless. Dead bees, what ones remained, accumulated in clumps, overflowing gutters. Butterflies gathered and flew in mysterious concentric circles around false flowers in porch-side pots. They did this for hours at a time. I spent a day watching them, and I could hear them chanting. They had resorted to magic ritual, formerly the purview of humanity, to bring the flowers back. But nothing came. The summer passed into fall, and our food supplies were dwindling. No cause for alarm, we were told. Things would be better next year. President Trump began to swell in size. He was already a large man, but even over video his presence seemed to extend from the screen into the very room we occupied while we watched. We watched in silence, rationing our stale and freezer-burnt bread. We no longer needed the failing flowers, he said. We had something new, better, bigger in development. Within weeks, the official White House store put on offer a new substance available to each and every American, each container golden and sparkling. It promised tremendous sustenance. Whether the flowers came back or not, we would be fine, better than before. Bigger, stronger, huger. You really ought to try this stuff. I haven't felt this good in years, my uncle told me. In fact, everyone told me that. At least, everyone over a certain age. It was implicit among my cohort that we didn't trust anything Trump had on offer. He was well over 400 pounds by now, but even that was a conservative estimate, because he was becoming indistinguishable from the buildings he occupied, and even from the people around him. It was impossible to place quite where he began and we ended. But we could all continue now. Our parents weren't worried. Things were better now. The stock market was up, and the job market was doing better, now that the majority of the workforce was employed in the manufacture of the mysterious liquid that was sustaining what remained of the population. Those who would talk about the process by which it was made, its ingredients, its origins, all gave conflicting accounts. Those who wouldn't talk about it no longer had light in their eyes, but by then, none of us did. The following spring, more things happened, or didn't happen, as the case may be. The branches of willow trees reached upwards as though hung upside down, their leaves sprouting green for a few days and fading to a sick yellow before falling off and blowing away in the wind. The leaves accumulated in occult patterns on parched and abandoned farmlands. The phases of the moon began to slow. It would remain full for a few days and then weeks at a time, and then disappear entirely. Every time it came back, it was either larger or closer. No one could be sure. Telescopes could no longer focus, or when they could, they seemed to peer into other, better worlds. Increasingly, we were trapped here. But for the sun and moon, the stars had abandoned us. By some luck, I had traded some of my remaining food, mostly cornflakes, for a small leather pouch filled with desiccated lilacs. These little pouches were quite the commodity these days. One could not walk down the street without being assaulted by the stench of greasy, rotting flesh from the boomers all around us. A shrunken, leathery woman, her eyes long since rotted away and replaced with scarred flesh, grabbed me by the collar, weeping, shrieking the question we had all been asking each other every day. Where are the flowers? Where have they gone? I reached into my pocket and retrieved a few petals, and I put them in her hands. She shoved away, snorting with a strange sort of belch, and slinked away into an alley. The AARP became a frequent topic of discussion. You really ought to join the AARP, the boomers told us. It's the best way to travel. It's bliss. None of us knew what they meant or why they were so focused on it. At least not at first. Suddenly, the boomers began appearing in several places at once. My uncle paid me a surprise visit, and at the same time also visited my sister, 2 counties away, to sell us on the virtues of the AARP. You'll love the benefits, he said. You should join as soon as possible. The roads were crumbling, and had been for years. The cracks in between the chunks of asphalt began to fill with a strange, thick substance that could only be described as loose, fatty flesh that snaked its way into every crevice, like a reeking, invasive kudzu. One of my friends, on one night with an oppressively bright and humongous moon, witnessed a boomer kneel down and begin to burrow into the slime, disappear entirely within it, and re-emerge the next day. When confronted, the boomer explained that he was simply going to his AARP meetup. We learned that the AARP was the name for this network of rancid, tumescent growth, a portion of the hive they had developed for themselves to survive the increasingly harsh heat of the day. None of us dared approach it for fear of being assimilated, if not devoured. Our children had long since disappeared. They, too, had their own sort of secret communication. Through their innocence, they had found a way to escape this doomed world. My 5-year-old told me, sadly, that he couldn't tell me how I could follow him, and that I didn't need to worry. At times he would reappear, telling me tales of other worlds where things had gone differently. He would share treasures with me, but said I could not keep them, for fear of some contamination, or sanction from an incomprehensible body, or some other obscure reason. I didn't have much willpower, or indeed much capacity to try to comprehend his reasons. I was simply happy to see him. I did gain some understanding of the unequal flow of time between us. While I aged as normal, he would appear one day as a middle-aged man, and then a few weeks later perhaps as a 7-year-old, and then again at 23. He was very explicit that I should never share his future with him, lest I disrupt his travels. I make sure to stick to that, for his sake. I love him dearly. The moon was intruding intolerably within our conscious space. It began to fill the entire sky, such that the days and nights looked much the same. God Emperor Trump was correct about one thing. No one went hungry anymore. No one experienced the sensation. We simply could not die. One day a structure emerged on the surface of the moon. It appeared like some kind of unicorn's horn expanding outward towards us. We prayed that this was either a portent of salvation or of a quick end, if not both. It was the first time any of us felt anything like hope. The boomers had now retreated entirely within the confines of the AARP, where nothing could reach them, with the exception of God Emperor Trump, which, that is to say, was one and the same with this flesh mound, which now covered most of what remained of dry land. The structure came closer with each day. It grew longer, extending toward the surface of our planet. It was a crystalline minaret, beautiful and made of glass. The first shining thing any of us had seen in what seemed like centuries. We could see the spiral staircase contained within, and a single figure was descending at a leisurely pace. His journey took years. We knew he was coming to take us away from here. We waited in silent meditation. It had been so long since he ascended to the lunar surface that most of us had forgotten about him. Then, with nothing left but our hope, the figure mere days away from our surface, the AARP attacked. Tendrils of rotting, veiny flesh wrapped around the spiral staircase and relentlessly grasped it, twisting it, crushing it, and us with it. We did not fight back. We maintained our silent prayers, for it was all we could do. Shards of crystal rained to earth, injuring many, burying themselves in our skin, and the descending figure fell gracefully into the ether and was never seen again. The glassy pieces fell between the stones, into the dirt. We gave them water. We prayed. If they could only bloom, we might see the flowers again. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you, even though and even though it probably shouldn't. It's it's weird that this is the kind of story that's going to stick with me for a while, but at the end of the day, I might, it's one of the things that keeps me on something awful. It's it's hard to imagine the cosmic odds of that piece of art coming together. That it all began with some guy bashing another guy's head for a acorn or something, and now we're doing this. It really captures the feel of that time period. Okay, that's enough of that. We're setting hauntology aside where it belongs, and we're going back to hauntings next week. I'll see if I can dig up any good folklore. No more of this, hey, I saw something spooky, and I can't explain it, and it's like, hey, here's my awesome granddad tormenting me with bloated bodies and gobbledygooks and whatever. Yeah, so you have that to look forward to, and if you weren't too traumatized by recent political trauma and bad memories, lots of bad memories, lots of betrayals and whatnot. Anyway, have a good week. Have a nice, you know what? Whatever you're doing, I'm sure it's good.